All right, all right. That was Gloria's band singing Grand Cross. Hi, I'm Jayme CheeseSlice. I'm the host, or I'm the producer and engineer of Uncontrolled Opposition, and I'm going to bring on the host, Gloria, Guillo, and Jayme Kuzmarov here in a second. But first, I want to let you guys know we are recording an hour session for the radio, and you get to watch us do this recording session live right here on YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, Kick. We're on Kick, everybody. That's the new platform that people are starting to watch stuff on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on Gloria and Jayme. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, Jayme. Hey, Jeremy.
And today we're going to be talking to Max Wilbert about corporate power and what we can do about it. And here we go. Hi, Max. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Glad to be with you
Welcome,
guys.
Max.
We're going to get started on this recording session. I'm going to hand it over to Gloria. So take it away.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Today's guest is Max Wilbert, co-founder of Project Thacker Pass, Protect Thacker Pass, which seeks to defend indigenous people and land in Nevada against green colonialism. He'll discuss his field experiences in overcoming corporate power and COINTELPRO tactics used against group members and leadership. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. While we are told the FBI CIA counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, was terminated in the early 70s under the scrutiny of the Church and Pike committees, it wasn't. It may have gotten a makeover and a new undisclosed acronym and involve more intelligence agencies like the NSA, but you could rest assured it continues today. For perspective, in the 70s, the FBI and CIA budgets combined were about $800 million. Today, they and approximately 16 other intel groups have a combined budget of over $75 billion, more than a 9,000% increase. $75 billion does not even include black ops, weapons, drugs, and human trafficking sales, blackmail, the outright theft of gold and currency, etc., and In-Q-Tel profits. In-Q-Tel is the CIA's tech venture capitalist arm. It's a Silicon Valley kingmaker. Within this context, bogeyman enemies are needed to justify this extraordinary waste of taxpayer funds just to keep the cash flowing, if nothing else. Historically, it didn't take long for this COINTELPRO moneymaker to expand from monitoring and disrupting the US Communist Party to targeting every group that challenged the status quo of the predator class under the nebulous banner of extremism, be they civil rights leaders, anti-war organizers, journalists, environmentalists, feminists, Native American activists, or right-wing groups. Not only does COINTELPRO eliminate threats through strong-arm tactics like violent arrests, tasers, rubber bullets, stun grenades, acoustical weapons that rupture eardrums and can cause organ failure, and outright assassinations, but also through deep infiltration and psychological manipulation under the directive to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any given target. Embedded informants often pose as trusted allies inside movements and work overtime to sow divisions. I've seen this many times over as a co-founder of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, as a member of the Anti-War International Committee in the Green Party, and in the Green Party's Women's Caucus, at WBAI meetings, and even at Covert Action magazine, where certain members on the editorial board blocked articles that questioned the prevailing COVID narrative or provided favorable reviews of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s books, when the timely publishing of these articles could have been influential and saved lives. Also, I've witnessed anti-imperialist groups I belonged to and wrote for write bald-faced lies about the racial composition of Canadian trucker protesters. They were slandered and libeled unjustly by being called the Ku Klux Klan. My close friends were trapped in Montreal with the truckers and confirmed their multiracial composition. Like most of the truckers, my Canadian friends were also unable to leave their own country at will because they did not receive the COVID jab. No bodily autonomy existed in the World Economic Forum's young global leader, Justin Trudeau's Canada. Typically, infiltrators alienate targets from their friends, allies, colleagues, and networks by spreading rumors, exaggerating flaws, and amplifying personal or ideological conflicts against them. They often turn existing supporters against the target by suggesting disloyalty or instability, or by accentuating philosophical differences. I haven't seen the agent provocateur push for violent action to justify police crackdowns or disinformation campaigns, which include forged letters, anonymous tips, and false media leaks up close and personal. I hope Max will share some frontline experiences that might involve these things with us today. For illustrative purposes and to demonstrate this is a nonpartisan issue, take, for example, the 2020 Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. It's one of our favorites at Uncontrolled Opposition to describe because it is documented that there were more infiltrators embedded in the group than actual militia members. Wrap your head around that. In court, it came out that there were 13 militia members and 15 infiltrators, which consisted of 12 FBI informants plus 3 undercover FBI agents. Defense attorneys argued somewhat successfully that the FBI manufactured the plot and entrapped defendants who otherwise lacked means or intent. Keep in mind that the Church Committee's final report warned the United States government has secretly engaged in conduct that could only be called tyranny. No democracy can survive if intelligence agencies become instruments of political control. Half a century later, that warning seems timely, no? Let us know what you think. The CIA, FBI, and corporations frequently use cutouts and shock troops for dirty work when possible to maintain plausible deniability and for optics. For example, killing altruistic, tree-hugging kids isn't a good look for intelligence agencies, whereas private military corporations such as Tiger Swan, Triple Canopy, and Stratford can conduct surveillance, gather intelligence, and carry out offensive operations without risking embarrassing blowback for the intelligence agencies or elected officials. Keep in mind that these firms are mostly staffed by former U.S. military personnel and that they apply counterinsurgency tactics developed in regime change wars, and just so happen to collaborate with local law enforcement to share data and resources. This coordinated approach enables corporations to monitor, control, and suppress grassroots movements using militarized strategies designed to neutralize foreign enemy opposition. Max, please tell us what led you to become an activist and organizer. What's green colonialism and how does it apply to Thacker Pass? And based on your field experience resisting Lithium Americas Corp., what does our audience need to know to develop and maintain an effective security culture and overcome corporate power? And also some of your experiences with COINTELPRO tactics, up close and personal. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Gloria and Jayme. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. That was a wonderful overview. I shouldn't use the word wonderful probably when we're talking about tactics like that, but it was, it was very cogent and
Thanks.
Thorough overview. So thank you for that. The fact that this is happening isn't theoretical. I just want to start there before we dive into your question, because the article that led you to reach out is actually a piece I wrote over 10 years ago now, back in 2014, and it's looking specifically at I quote from an article that came out of the Snowden leaks. So this is now an 11-year-old source. The documents from inside the National Security Agency, the Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group, JTRIG, saying that they use tactics such as injecting false material onto the internet in order to destroy the reputation of targets, and using social sciences and other techniques to manipulate online discourse and activism to generate outcomes it considers desirable. This, I think, is one of the most important things for us to understand. COINTELPRO in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s, and its precursors looked very different from what we're seeing now. Right now, because so much of discourse, communication, activism takes place via the internet, and because these companies have Freudian slip, these government agencies have total access to essentially the entirety of that information, the platforms that power this dialogue, this discourse, including what we're talking on right now, because they have access to now the most powerful AI systems in the world, because they have on the payroll some of the most talented social scientists in the world. The power that this affords these agencies to not just use sort of the blunt tools of repression that were used 50 years ago, but a much more surgical, precise, and difficult to counter, difficult to understand methods of manipulating and undermining resistance. We'll get into this more, but prompted by your introduction, I just wanted to share that. But I should back up. I should introduce myself. I grew up in Seattle, and I came of age in the post WTO era. You know, I was pretty young when the protests happened in '99. I think I was 12 or something, but I was becoming more politically aware at that time. I came from a politically active family. My grandpa was a conscientious objector. My parents were marching in civil rights movement stuff and protesting the Vietnam War and apartheid and U.S. support for genocide in Guatemala and Central America, elsewhere. And so I came from this tradition of engagement, critique of the government, critique of official narratives, understanding that the newspapers are not telling the truth, or at least they're certainly not telling the whole truth. They're manipulating public opinion in many cases for their financial benefit, political benefit. And there was this beautiful political ferment that was happening in Seattle in the early 2000s that brought together radical environmentalists, labor organizers, indigenous folks and indigenous solidarity activists, anarchists, communists, people from across the political spectrum of dissidents who had come together against the WTO, recognizing that corporate power and this sort of merger of state and corporate power that globalization has really represented is an incredible threat to all of us. That, despite these different identities, cultural backgrounds, affinities that people were belonging to, that there were shared values around these issues. And so I was lucky to be brought up in that and be exposed from a young age to a very robust radical analysis that had these different elements that those different groups, those different folks could teach me about and bring in, so I feel blessed because I wasn't brought up by getting into activism just in one particular lane, and that was it. That was all I knew. I was exposed to all these different approaches, radical anti-racist politics. My sister's old boyfriend, who was from central Mexico and idolized the Zapatistas and taught me all about them. All kinds of different people who influenced me. And so that led me to the work that I've been doing essentially ever since. I mean, I have been organizing, I would say, more seriously for 15, going on 20 years probably now. And it's certainly, there's a big learning curve in that. It's not like I jumped in and knew everything and was some great organizer. No, I've made tons of mistakes. I'm just a normal person like anybody else, but I was very blessed to have that sort of early introduction to this, to grow up with, manufacturing consent and people's history of the United States on the bookshelf and just be exposed to that as a matter of course from childhood. So, that led me to different things. I've also had this long love for the natural world. I was raised, going out camping and with animals around and so on. And it very quickly became clear to me that this culture that we live in, of course, is destroying the natural world at a phenomenal pace. That there is this vast gulf between our everyday lived experience in this culture, where we have more relationships with our screens and our telephones and our cars and paved streets than we do with a single wild animal, a single wild plant, let alone a community of wild plants and wild beings existing and flourishing multi-generationally all around us that we're embedded in. Like, we're so far disconnected from the natural world. And I think you're in NYC, so, I mean, you know how that is, right? But that led me to environmental work in part, which for me, like I said, it was never just about environmental work. It was about environmental work as a proxy, as an avenue, as an angle on imperialism, on corporate power, on racism and imperialism and so on, war, all these different issues. And so I was in mainstream environmental work very briefly, but it became clear to me that it was BS because of that radical political grounding that I had. I was able to see through it relatively quickly, thankfully, and understand that, man, there's a lot of consumerism being promoted in here and a lot of green capitalism, and this seems like crap. So I got exposed to more radical environmental stuff, started to really ground my analysis in that. And that led to, you asked about Protect Thacker Pass, you mentioned that. That led to probably about 10 years ago, I started doing talks and educating people about green technology and my critique of green technologies, solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, geothermal energy, many others. They're all sort of subsets of the same type of approach, philosophically, technologically. And I look at those things as being false solutions, as being issues that lead us away from the core of the problem. And that led me to write a book called Bright Green Lies, co-write a book called Bright Green Lies that was released in 2021 that critiques these things from an environmental perspective.
The other thing I just wanted you to focus on just a little bit for our audience is green colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thanks for that, Gloria. And, that's part of the analysis that we brought in Bright Green Lies, and that I always talk about in these talks, is that we can't ignore the fact that electric vehicles, for example, as the audience probably will know, are made often using cobalt from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They're often made using nickel from Indonesia, steel from the Amazon basin, plastics that might come from oil extracted in Nigeria. These supply chains that exist to extract the raw materials, to create the components, to assemble the components, to ship them around the world to the wealthiest. Their cars are owned by about 1/8, 1/7 maybe of the world's population. These have major impacts, and of course, it's all of these systems have been built on top of historical legacies of colonialism, ongoing legacies of neocolonialism, to the extent that you can even separate those two out. Predatory capitalistic systems, imperialistic economic arrangements. And they're not, if you're talking about justice or sustainability, these technologies are not solutions. At best, they may be minor harm reduction approaches. It may be the difference between, smoking crack out on the street, or, using crack in some sort of controlled circumstance where somebody's nearby to help you if you overdose, because it's what do they call them? It's a safe injection site or something like that, right? So, I mean, these technologies, in my opinion, in some ways are even more dangerous than that, because it's not just harm reduction, it's actually leading us away from confronting the problem, because so many people believe that they're real solutions. They believe that they're not just a harm reduction measure, that they're actually a solution to the underlying problems. And that is profoundly dangerous, in my opinion. So that's what we focused on in the book. And then it was published in 2021. We finished writing it, a year and a half earlier. And I started learning about this proposed lithium mine in northern Nevada. I live in Oregon, so it's about a 8-9 hour drive from me. And I decided to go down and check it out. Because, I figured I'm writing about these type of projects, I should see it with my own eyes. At the time, there's no mine. It's just the place that's going to be destroyed. But I wanted to go see it because, I have a background, again, in camping and guiding people into the wilderness and so on. So I was like, I want to see what's at stake here. A lot of people would look at this land, which, Thacker Pass is or was now this sagebrush ecosystem. So no trees, sagebrush don't get in this spot. They don't get higher than about 3 feet or something like that. So a lot of people would look at that and just say, this is a wasteland. There's no rivers, there's no waterfalls, there's no wetlands or big forests or redwoods or anything like that. This is a wasteland. Why not mine it? Why not destroy it? But I know that's not true. I've been doing environmental work, indigenous solidarity work, resistance work in Nevada for many years now. And I know that it's an incredible ecosystem, an incredible place, absolutely stunning and very underappreciated by people who haven't seen it or have only seen pictures or maybe driven by on the freeway at 80 miles an hour. So I went out there. That led to us setting up a protest camp at the site that was in place for almost a year. We continued camping out there. After that, the government's trying to fine us $50,000 for that protest camp. We're fighting that fine right now. They're slow playing it because they can. It's an administrative process, not a real court system through the Bureau of Land Management. So there's no deadlines or timelines for them. They can do whatever the hell they want, basically. And so they've just been hanging it over our heads for 4 years now. And the campaign was ongoing. We helped organize with tribes in the region. My good friend Will, who I started the protest camp with, represented a couple of the tribes in federal court. He's an attorney in lawsuits against the project. Those lawsuits failed because we have a colonial legal system. It doesn't protect the rights of wild places, wild beings, or tribes. Basically never. In very few cases. And even when it does, the best case outcome from those lawsuits would have been slowing the project down. It wouldn't have stopped it, even if we'd won those lawsuits. But there were more protest camps that we participated in out there. There was nonviolent direct actions. We blockaded the construction, some prayer actions with Native elders out there, because as it turns out, we didn't know this when we went out there, but very sacred site, very culturally significant place to Native people from the area, because of not only a long history of inhabitants and using the land there, but also there were massacres there, 2 massacres of Native people. One, an intertribal conflict, and one was a massacre committed by the U.S. cavalry in 1865. So that was the campaign, and it was a lens in many ways on green colonialism, on this idea that you brought up, Gloria, that these projects which we're seeing, this was a lithium mine. I didn't mention that, but this was a lithium mine to mine lithium, which is the primary component in electric vehicle batteries, in energy storage batteries. And this was being promoted very heavily by the Biden administration. It was actually approved under Trump in his first term, right before he left office. And then Biden fought to protect it and gave it a $2.26 billion loan. And now Trump is protecting it again and making sure that the project goes forward in his second term. So, even though Trump is ostensibly anti-EVs, of course, Elon is his buddy, or maybe former buddy now. And he doesn't give it. He wants to mine everything and get as much profit out of the land as possible, just like every other president basically does. So it's a bipartisan push for this type of thing. The Democratic senators in Nevada backed this up 100%. And while we were out there, we saw various forms of repression. I've also seen various forms of repression throughout my organizing life. And I don't know where you want to go, Gloria or Jayme, but I'll defer to you on how you want to approach talking about those topics.
Well, yeah, I think we want to hear, and if I could add one point, yeah, I think you made some excellent points, and related to the copper, cobalt, and the electric vehicles. Because I'll be giving a talk in a few weeks about Zambia. I spent 6 months in Zambia, and they have copper mining there. And there's a report by Goldman Sachs, copper is the new oil, and I've seen firsthand the terrible environmental effects of the mining there, of the copper mining. It destroyed rivers, and I went to the Copper Belt area, and the air was foul, and it was horrible, and there was horrific poverty conditions of the people living around those mines. It's just these mega corporations making huge amount of money, exploiting the local labor force and ruining their environment and ruining a lot of their land, so they can't farm it. When traditionally they were more successful doing farming, and there's nothing put back. That these mining companies put almost nothing back into the community as far as education. You go to the library, the only books are from the 60s, because that was when they had a socialist government. So anyway, I think your points you're making are very well grounded in very different ways, including some that I've experienced directly. So why don't we get into the question of repression? What kind of repression have you seen?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I would say, Jayme, is the repression that I've experienced is nothing like the folks in Zambia have dealt with. And Zambia, of course, is just to the south of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I have a good friend there who I've been working with to do some research on planned lithium mining up there. And, the violence, the repression that they're facing, that people who speak up are facing in places like that is a different level than we see here. I've got a lot of good friends in the Philippines who are involved in environmental work. Environmentalists in the Philippines, it's the most dangerous place in the world to be a land defender. People just disappear. They just disappear and they're gone, and they're probably tortured and killed somewhere. And so, I want to be clear that in the political climate that we have in the United States, I have a robust critique of this country as anyone else. Colonial state built on genocide and slavery, with a faux democracy, a corporate democracy. But I have to give credit to those in this country who fought in the past to secure certain rights and protections that we do at least ostensibly have, and like the Bill of Rights wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been added to the Constitution without people fighting like hell to get it in there. The original drafters of the Constitution didn't want that, they didn't want that in there because they were oligarchs. And, it was grassroots movements. It was people who were coming up against the realities of tyranny and oppression that fought for basically all the rights that we have in this country, even though they're rapidly being eroded and they're often BS. It's real that we have a lot more protections here than other people do. There's, to some extent, a rule of law, a due process, and it's crap a lot of the time. And especially when it comes to, to the destruction of the land, for example, it's completely all legalized. But I just want to point that out, so we know, and I think that's one reason why we see the development of these very sophisticated tactics of repression and infiltration that are detailed, from COINTELPRO to JTRIG and these more modern manifestations of it. That's one reason why we see this, is because it's more difficult in this country to simply get away with disappearing torturing and assassinating, your political opponents. People go to jail for that kind of thing. There are ramifications for these types of things. And that's why this is all done in secret, right? That's why all this is done with black budgets. There's no congressional oversight. There's no public oversight. It all happens in the shadows. It's because if the full scale of this were revealed to the public, there would be outrage, like there was when the Snowden leaks happened. Of course, that outrage was managed. It was controlled. It was channeled. There was, supposedly contrition from various branches of the government. Oh, yes, that was illegal. We really shouldn't have done that. We shut down that program, right? Nobody believes it. Nobody believes that. We know that these programs have continued. Maybe they changed the name. Maybe they shut down one facility and opened a new one. But that's it. I want to just say that because there's a political battleground in this country like anywhere else, and these are contested issues, right? This is something that I'm not a Marxist, but I try and learn from everyone. And this is something that Gramsci talked about, is that institutions are contested political spaces. They're not monolithic. They don't always have the same beliefs and orientations throughout them. It shifts over time, and they're battlegrounds. And so, yeah, I have to give respect to those people and movements that have in the past forced through some reforms and some protections, journalists, human rights crusaders, the labor movement, hell, with the 8-hour workday and child protection laws and all that type of stuff, child labor laws. But, we can't pretend that those protections are anything close to perfect. They're certainly not. I mean, look at Fred Hampton. They assassinated him. They sent an informant to drug his food and drink, so he was on sleeping pills, and then they came in and shot him in the head and killed him, right? And this type of thing happens in the United States. Now, in this era, like since COINTELPRO, we have seen, with the rise of more and more media scrutiny of government, we have seen this shift towards these more covert tactics. And I think it's very, very deliberate, because it's much harder to get any sort of public accountability. And so you asked Jeremy about what I've seen, what I've experienced. Of course, on one end of the spectrum, you have sort of the more public stories that we see about whether it's anarchists at the DNC and the RNC protesting and getting entrapped in similar ways to the story you told, Gloria, getting entrapped with the FBI agents who provided them with materials to make Molotov cocktails, and then they go to jail and so on. So there are these more obvious examples. Or, look at the Occupy movement and the militarized response against the Occupy movement that wasn't just police coming in and shutting things down. In my opinion, it is certain that there was mass infiltration of the people's assemblies, the decision-making bodies in these Occupy camps. There was deliberate disruption of the decision-making processes and the operations of those resistance groups that were taking place, which is very easy to do if you have open door policy. Basically, anyone can come in and join our meetings and join our groups and so on. And then you have destabilization. You have public relations campaigns where the media is going after them, creating the justification for shutting down these camps. Oh, they're dangerous. Oh, there's this reason and that reason. There's public health issues. There's XYZ. And then finally, you have the militarized police response shutting down the camp, which is characterized as just a cleaning things up type operation. At that point, it's just the end point of the movement's already been essentially neutralized at that point, right? And so this is something that there are these more obvious examples like that. But the article that led me to this interview that you shared, Gloria, and reached out about was a piece I wrote 11 years ago or something, and it was about these unsubstantiated attacks that were made by an anonymous group on an organization that I was a part of at the time. And this was sort of the heyday of cancel culture. And this was really at the rise of the heyday of cancel culture, 2014, where you have, mobs of internet bullies essentially going after anyone who doesn't toe specific party lines and ruthlessly destroying their reputation, their relationships, their ability to fundraise, their ability to organize effectively. And that's the type of thing that can be integrated so seamlessly with these type of COINTELPRO style, JTRIG style disruption campaigns, when it can appear as though it's not coming from the government or corporations at all. It's coming from inside our movements. The division, the infighting, the questioning of each other, the culture of suspicion and fear and hostility that is created by this. Of course, these types of tendencies they don't all come from the government, right? There's a long history on the left of people attacking each other and our movement struggling. I mean, you can read Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, and he talks about like groups disrupting each other's speeches in South Africa and yelling at each other, and you don't have the right party line, essentially, right? So some of it is homegrown, and we have to take our responsibility for that. And I know this happens across the political spectrum. It's not just the left. But a lot of it, I believe, is coming out of covert government and corporate projects to disrupt our movements. Now, we can probably never prove this, and that's by design, right? It's speculation. That's why I'm talking to you on, no disrespect intended, a relatively small radio show, rather than on the front page of the New York Times or NPR or CNN or Fox News or whatever, right? Because this is speculation. We know it's not speculation, of course. You look at what's happening, you look at the history of these social movements over the last decades, you look at the JTRIG leaks, you look at the COINTELPRO history, you put the pieces together, and the puzzle is very clear, right? It's obvious to anyone who's paying attention. And yet, it's never going to be widely reported on. Even when there were the Snowden leaks and there were these JTRIG stories, Glenn Greenwald writes an article, there's a piece in The Guardian, there's a couple pieces about it, and that's it, right? Because most people aren't involved in these social movements. They're not seeing these tactics play out every day. And frankly, a lot of people within the United States, of course, have sort of been bought off or bought into the political process, or are so politically disempowered that they're just like, screw it, it's all corrupt, it's all messed up anyway, there's nothing we can do. That's where a lot of people are at, so yeah, other examples.
We perceive apathy as a psyop. It's just to wear down your audience to the point where they throw their hands up, but we see that as a psyop too. So you do also.
I do, yeah. And this is Steve Bannon talked about flood the zone with shit, right? That was his whole strategy. He was talking about how this is a Republican Democrat thing, which I'm not into that, but he was talking about how the Democrats aren't the real enemy, the media is the enemy, and the way to deal with the media is flood the zone with shit, which basically means just flood misinformation. And that's one reason why we live in this sort of information saturated environment that we have now, is because it's so much easier to deceive people. We don't need censorship anymore in terms of, you can't write that, we're going to burn your book, we're going to ban your book. We don't need that. They don't need that anymore, because you can write your radical book and 200 people are going to read it, and who gives a shit? That's
you're giving Jayme a lot of words to edit out.
Yeah.
This is a radio program. Yeah.
Swearing. It's hard.
Poop or crap.
But
for Jayme's sake.
But yeah, and so more concrete examples. So I in 2013. Oh, you guys got me?
Okay, go ahead. Continue.
Okay.
In 2013, you were saying?
In 2013, and 2015, there was a sort of FBI sweep against me and other radical environmentalists. And so we had the FBI going to people's workplaces, going to people's homes, asking them questions, wanting information. What kind of activism are you involved in? Who are you associated with? What groups are you part of? All this type of information. Now, luckily, and I'd love to get into strategies for resisting this because it's really important that people know this. Luckily, all the people have been trained in security culture. So nobody talked. Everyone knew the right answer when cops or FBI or anyone wants to talk to you is, you can talk to my lawyer. I'm not saying a word, basically. I mean, any lawyer will tell you that, regardless of whether you're involved in radical politics or not. You don't talk to cops ever, never. You don't chit chat. You don't say, I've got nothing to hide. Sure, I'll talk to you. You just say, no, sorry, you can talk to my lawyer. Because even if you are, quote unquote, completely innocent, cops, and they can manufacture evidence against people. They can manufacture a case out of nothing. There's no reason to ever say anything. Of course, in some cases, you're legally required to say certain things like your name and your address and so on. Sure, right? But generally, the only question is, am I being detained or am I free to go? And if they say yes, you say, I'd like to speak with my lawyer. And if they say no, you're not being detained, then you walk away or you close the door. That's it. That's the conversation. So people knew this. I've got a photograph. I don't know if I can share my screen here. I can probably find it here in my computer, but I've got so this was 20. I don't know if I can share.
Remember, this is radio, so they can't see the picture anyway.
Yeah.
It's a business card from the Seattle division of the Puget Sound Joint Terrorism Task Force at the FBI that they left at my parents' house that said on the back, looking for Max, please give me a call. Special Agent Michael S.
My God.
And, my parents, like I said, they come from a political background themselves. I mean, they grew up in the Vietnam era. They know you don't talk to the FBI. You don't say anything to those people, right? And that's not to say the FBI have never done anything good when they're taking down pedos or whatever, fentanyl dealers. Like, I'm as happy as anyone else. Good on them, right? But no, you don't talk to these people. That's not how it's done. And they'll try and intimidate people. They'll try and scare people. They showed up at people's workplaces, people who had sort of more tenuous employment or employment where a visit like that could mean them getting fired, and they're trying to use leverage against people. This is why security culture is such an important topic. And security culture is this whole idea that's grown out of activist spaces, out of revolutionaries. It's what we've learned over decades of dealing with the police, with state repression, with these types of tactics. It's how do we resist them? How do we keep ourselves as safe as possible and as effective as possible in the face of this type of resistance or this type of repression? And sorry, I'll just share one more example before we get into security culture, which is the Thacker Pass. We knew at Thacker Pass that repression in various forms was very likely. I was writing about this while we were out there. We knew we were being surveilled. We had federal police out there pretty quickly, interviewing us, asking questions. What are you guys doing here? When are you going to leave? You can only camp for 14 days. We had our lawyer kind of try and fight them off for a while on that. We eventually came to a middle ground where we were like, okay, people aren't going to exceed the 14-day camping limit, but we're just going to rotate people in and out. So we have a continuous camp occupation resistance here. And, we know, because we did a Freedom of Information Act request, we know that they sent undercover agents into our camp. We know that they were surveilling us on multiple instances when we weren't aware of it, from far away, from airplanes, from helicopters. We know all of these things, right?
Can I ask one question here? Could you describe some of the characteristics of a typical informant?
That is very, very difficult to say, because sometimes an informant or an infiltrator might be actively seeking to disrupt what's going on, and they might be combative, they might cause problems in meetings, they might be suggesting things that the group doesn't want to do, they might be sort of causing trouble in relationships, in political relationships. And in that case, whether or not they're informant, it's like, get them out of here. This person's a problem. And that's one of the things security culture says. But in other cases, they might be very cooperative. They might be super helpful. They might come in, saying that they have a lot of experience. They might come in with references. They might come in with, a history in the movement even. We don't know, right? I'm sure that they've got some deep plants in various movements, and we don't know who these people are. That's the thing, is we can't predict who it's going to be or who it is. And so security culture is all about working within that reality. In fact, one of the rules, the baseline rules of security culture, is don't speculate about who might be an informant. It's not useful. And the culture of paranoia that's represented by that speculation, that's what the infiltration is trying to create. That's one of the reasons they're doing it, is so that we're always saying, oh, Jeremy's looking kind of weird, and he's I just don't trust him. He's got a colored shirt, and That's what they want to create. Sometimes informants will do that kind of thing themselves, where they'll speculate that somebody else is the informant, right? To create division, and that's documented from COINTELPRO. We know that that's happened, that informants will go in and they'll create suspicion about somebody else being informant to sow division inside the movement. So we don't speculate. That's not what we do. Unless we have concrete evidence, we don't speculate. We focus on behavior rather than people.
There was a saying in the 60s, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And I think that's a very good litmus test for all groups. Mm-hmm. If people are working together and they're cooperative and they're moving the platform forward, mm-hmm. that's good. The minute mm-hmm. someone is constantly gumming up the works and causing fights and problems, these are COINTELPRO tactics. It doesn't necessarily mean that individual is a paid informant or something of that nature, but it does indicate that the behaviors that they're demonstrating are COINTELPRO tactics.
Yeah, they're disruptive. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is we have to focus on behavior. If people are causing problems, if they're harming the movement, if they are being disruptive and destructive, then they need to be removed from our groups, from our organizing communities. And that could be, they might have a mental health issue going on. They might be in a crisis, right? They might just be an asshole. There are a lot of reasons, or they could be an actual informant or a plant or something. But either way, to be effective, we have to do that. We have to protect ourselves. Now, if you're talking about more serious actions, more seriously, potentially illegal type of stuff, I was just watching a video the other day that was talking about how a lot of people don't like to accept this, but if you are an activist, if you are resisting imperialism, if you are resisting the destruction of the planet, you are a criminal. You are considered a criminal by the powers that be. And we need to accept that. Like, these people see us as criminals. They will try to arrest us. They will try to outlaw us. They will try to destroy us in any way they can. And that's why there needs to be a separation between groups and people that are doing above ground work. They're organizing, doing radio shows like this, doing political protests, doing rallies, union organizing, all these types of above ground tactics, mostly legal tactics. And people who are doing more serious underground type activities, more seriously illegal stuff. For example, in the UK, the repression against environmental activists has ramped up significantly. So you have Roger Hallam, for example, got sentenced to 5 years in prison. He just got out. He served less than 5 years. It was, I don't remember how much, 2, something like that. But he was sentenced to 5 years for joining a Zoom call to talk about and plan a nonviolent direct action, a disruptive protest action. And as a result of this, a lot of the above ground organizers are saying, screw this. It's safer for us to do illegal clandestine stuff at night with masks on in secret than to go join a public protest and do nonviolent direct action. It's actually safer for us. And so you have these movements escalating sabotage against...
Point of clarification, when you say that, you're talking more about something called monkey wrenching, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this in the Palestinian solidarity movement over there, big time, with Palestine Action, right? And their sabotage against arms manufacturing facilities. And these groups, this group and other groups have increasingly turned to these tactics. And in order to stay safe in that context, you can't have public open recruitment. You can't just have a website where you say, this is how you join our sabotage group, right? Or monkey wrenching group. You have to have systems of trust that are built on real relationships, knowing people face to face over time, that are gradually expanded. You carefully expand your group over time. They're using basically cell structures that are similar to the structures used by resistance movements and revolutionaries throughout history to minimize the damage if there is an informant or somebody gets in, So it's basically need to know basis. You operate in small groups where maybe you only know one or two other people. And this is why I think that framing that the system sees us as criminals is important, because that's what criminals have to do. Criminals have to protect themselves, whether they're drug dealers or human traffickers or whatever. I mean, I'm not saying that I have any sympathy for those people, but there's a reason why they use these strategies, because the system is trying to shut down what they're doing, justifiably in many cases, right? But in the case of people who are resisting imperialism, resisting genocide, resisting ecocide, we need to learn lessons where we can. And I think that's a very important one to learn, is that we need to defend ourselves in our movements. And how we do that is by using security culture.
And can you elaborate, what do you mean by security culture?
Yeah, so security culture is we don't call it security rules or security practices, because it's not just a checklist. It's not just one or two things. It's not just, I use Signal app, now I'm safe, right? That's not what security culture is. Security culture is a mindset. It's a culture that we create in our groups. It's a shared set of understandings that we have powerful opponents. They are actively working to destroy our movements. We need to protect ourselves against them. And there are various recommendations and practices that we can implement to do that, depending upon the strategies that we're using, the political context we find ourselves in, and so on. So security culture involves things like the firewall that I just talked about between above ground and underground forms of resistance. It involves things like you don't speculate about who's an informant. You focus on behavior, right? It involves things like you don't talk about illegal behavior in the open. You just don't. You don't talk about your plans. You don't talk about what you're going to do. You have an information security mindset. You don't talk to cops, right? You don't allow them into your house without a warrant. These types of things. And that's why we call it security culture, is the rules can change over time depending on the political context, depending on the type of repression that's being waged against us, depending on where we're located in the world, right? It's a fluid situation. That's why, again, to use the example from South Africa, the African National Congress was originally completely above ground, like organizing like a political party. They were holding rallies and protests and so on. And then the apartheid state outlawed them. It was made illegal to even be a member of the group. And so they had a choice, which was essentially give up on organized political activity or go underground, take up more serious forms of resistance. Now, like I said, that type of repression that's more blatant and open, that's, sicking the dogs on people, that's shooting people in the street, that's outlawing groups, that has become passé in the United States and other industrialized countries. they've moved on to these much more sophisticated forms of political repression. And I think we need to get more sophisticated in our response to it as well.
Well, one of the things you had written, Max, and I agree with
And we
100%.
have to wrap it up.
Yeah, one of the things I agree with 100% is that one of the ways to combat this is to have unity and to have good relationships with your comrades and the people within your organization, so that and also just basically to look at where you guys are and gals are aligned, as opposed to focusing on places where you may disagree.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of philosophical concepts that we deal with, and not everybody's on the same page 100%. So we can either spend our time focusing on the 99% that we're all in agreement with, or we could have internal fights over that 1% where we may have some different disagreements. So I think it's quite important to focus on where I agree. It's very important to focus on where we agree than on the tiny bit that we disagree. And I'd like to give you an opportunity, as we have to wrap it up, to just let us know and our audience know where we can find your work and support your efforts. Is what's going on with Thacker Pass at this moment? Is there a site or a website where people can find out about it, or do they find out about it through you? Please explain. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. Well, you can find my work. I'm on Substack. I have a newsletter there that's called Biocentric, where I write about these issues. I have a website too, which you can contact me via, just search my name, you'll find it. Protect Thacker Pass is the organization. Myself and a bunch of other folks are being sued by the mining company right now. So we're fighting off that lawsuit at the moment, and they're destroying the land out there. So, we've lost our campaign at this point. That's the reality of it. We did raise a lot of awareness about these issues, and I think changed the conversation on a national, international level. Not single-handedly, a lot of people around the world contributed, but we changed the conversation on these issues. But there's a long way to go. So, we're gearing up for the next mine fight, which is probably going to be just on the Oregon side of the border near Thacker Pass. And definitely folks should reach out if they were interested in this conversation. They have questions for me. They want to get involved in some of the political work I've described. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, it's time to close the show. And I'd like to just let our audience know that the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, and I'm joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter, X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. Thank you.
All right, so that's the show. Oh, Max just cut out.
You trained him too well.
He just cut out. I wanted to promote his book before we ended the show. So he's one of the co-authors of Bright Green Lies, How Environmental Movement Lost Its Way and What We Can Do About It. The subtitles, The Politics of Living. So I wanted him to speak about that for a second, but we did get a comment on this earlier in the show. So Alexis has read it. She said it was a great book. So I just wanted to promote that before we ended the show. Is there anything else from you guys?
I think we're good.
All right. So I want to thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Jayme. Thank you, Max. We stuck around for a little bit. We're going to get out of here today. We'll be back next week, and you can look for listening to this on the radio in the next following weeks. And we'll see you next time. I got to get to editing on this. There's a lot I got to edit out.
There's a couple of words you got to get there.
It's not a problem for YouTube, just so you guys know. It's fine on YouTube, but on the radio, it's going to be a problem. But that's no big deal. I can handle that. All right. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we'll see you next time. We're going to get out of here.
Do you want me to stay on?
Well, we're going to have to end this show, but we
got to end the show.
Back
and
on.
We can
don't go yet.
Yeah.
But let's leave here. All right.
All right. We're going to get out of here.
Leave this, and then what do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna
stay tuned.
we'll
reach
follow
out
your
to you.
WhatsApp. Follow your WhatsApp. We'll tell you what to do on WhatsApp. All right. See you, everybody. We're getting out, and we'll be around for next week. Bye-bye. Hey, I'm setting up a StreamYard session right now, and I'll send you the link. Okay, yeah, I gotta close out the show.
You got back, stick to